Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to you wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of recovery, particularly where the founders of AA encourage us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. For example, in the third step of Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, where it states, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And also to the 11th step, where it states, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. We speak to people with all manner of higher powers, from those who are atheists, Sufis, agnostics, Christians, Buddhists, followers of Islam, paganists, and some of the people who subscribe to things like non-duality and saltwater Baptists. Anyone or anything, we'll have a look at what their higher power is. We leave no stone unturned, and it's our aim to promote tolerance and understanding and empathy and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and to carry the important message and carry that message without judgment to the still suffering alcoholic. And please just remember before we start that this is not an AA meeting. It's just some people's version of the truth, whatever that may be. And sometimes in these meetings we speak to people not necessarily in recovery, but mostly we speak to seekers, to gurus who have a background in the 12-step program. And today it's my honor to introduce you to none other than Joe C. And here's a little Joe biography. Hello, Joe. How are you, mate? Good to see you. And I'll have to unmute him there. We'll do that in a minute. But just to give you a quick bio of Joe. Joe wrote the first secular daily reflection book for people in recovery from addiction, Beyond Belief, Agnostic Musings for 12-Step Life. He's a journalist, a researcher, a music geek. He writes and broadcasts about art, finance, addiction recovery, history, billiards, and demographic shifts. He hosts and produces IndieCan Radio and Rebellion Dogs Radio. He's been clean and sober since the age of disco, which to my liking is probably around 1976. And I think that was in a little country town called Montreal. Joe has shared his primary research on AA, the broader recovery community and addiction recovery study with substance use treatment professionals and 12-step history enthusiasts. Sometimes Joe is a guest on radio and podcast, just like he is today on this one, on Here's Tom with the Weather. And before we go to Joe, I'm just going to ask Anne, one of our co-hosts, to do a reading from Joe's book, and it's for January the 1st. So as it is today. So over to you, Anne.
January 1st, here's the book, Beyond Recovery. The Tao is a world unfolding according to its own laws. Nothing is done or forced. Everything just comes about. To live in accord with the Tao is to understand non-doing and non-striving. Your life is already doing itself. That's from John Kabat-Zinn, who is a PhD born in 1944. Have we become human doings who have forgotten how to be? Does a day of not doing and not striving sound unrecovery? In Western culture, we are encouraged to make New Year's resolutions, ostensibly to correct our flawed lives. Taoism suggests that we are worthy just the way we are. So is the world around us. How would our days, years, or lives look if we felt 100% worthy already? Forget the resolution. Non-doing and non-striving sound like practices that should come naturally. Don't worry, be happy. So how have we become habitually self-critical? Some 12 and 12 members may always be striving to get good enough, yet never satisfied. Each day this year, we will look to wisdom, humor, and contradiction to propel the good ship recovery. We don't strive to create the energy in our world, we work with it. This year, we examine and re-examine what we think we know. We start by questioning whether or not we are flawed, and if flawed, whether or not we need to be fixed. Are we navigating through life consciously, sailing along on the energy that presents itself, or are we struggling against the elements? We don't need to conform to embrace the fellowship's tradition of unity. Each of us is as unique as our own thumbprint. Non-doing and non-striving are symbiotic with a program of action. Being still allows for a wider vantage point than the tunnel vision of full speed ahead. Non-doing and non-striving are not exactly 12-step, 12 tradition cliches. Am I set in my ways or open to new ways of seeing?
Wow. And so say all of us. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Anne. And so Joe, I'm just gonna. Sorry, I've just realised that you're muted. So can we just unmute Joe? Is he still muted? Hold on. Where is he?
We're in
co-host. You got him? There you go, mate. So
there we go.
Joe, thank you. That was fantastic, and I love the whole open-minded thing at the back end of what Anne's just read there, and that is indeed a great start to the new year. So, mate, the big question, I think a lot of us are here. There's a lot of people here who are secular, who are agnostic or atheist, and there's also people on the other side who are quite open-minded, and perhaps people who aren't. But I think the big question a lot of us will ask, and let's get down to it, is how does an atheist get a higher power, and how do they stay sober? Can you please tell us about that?
Well, just to quote the book, that's as individual as everybody's thumbprint. Believers don't come in one package, and neither do non-believers. Some people have a secular higher power. The original one that goes back in AA history is make the group your higher power. Here are people who have found sobriety. Their collective wisdom can be shared with you. You can rely on them. After all, it's step 3. It's the care of, not the control of. So where am I going to go for my care? And the AA group is a logical place. For me, I like higher purpose. And higher purpose might not be. It might be an internal power. It's what I go with. It's more active, less, sort of heady. And I spend a lot of time from the neck up in my head, right? So, what's my purpose? And AA has given me a purpose, and recovery has given me a purpose. Other people find the great outdoors or some other GOD acronym, gift of desperation, and I don't think we have to talk in GOD acronyms. I think people are free to sort of find their own way, trust their gut. And the big book itself even talked about that later, that sort of finding deep down inside that sort of internal intuition that we presently come to see as a power greater than ourselves. And it speaks to how our more religious members call it God consciousness. So for the rest of us, we might call it something else.
It's interesting what you say that you mentioned the word religious members. And I know, and that's not I went to a religious school and it did put me off religion. And I've always found it was important for me to know the difference between religion and spirituality, for instance. Was that you? Can you just give us an example of maybe where a little bit of your story? Because I know you got sober like around when the dinosaurs were walking, but can you give us an idea about how you came to your understanding of that higher purpose?
Yeah, I mean, the AA that I got sober in was a growing, vibrant AA. If you look at AA, we're in our 86th year now. So the halfway point was 1978. So anyone who got sober before 1978, they got sober in the first half, and this is the second half. And the first half was growing. The average sobriety was lower, so people with 4-month sobriety were helping people with 4 days sobriety, and people were getting active. There was no my sponsor talk. It was very much a make it. It was life during wartime because there were newcomers coming and going all of the time, and you couldn't just wait for someone to do it for you. You had to sort of pick it up and run with it. And so that is a little different than the AA I moved to when when I moved to Toronto, where it is more book-based, more structured. I was going to say rigid, but they just like the structure more, where Montreal is more joie de vivre, a little more Euro, and Toronto is, thank God it's Monday town. They're all about work and order and what have you, right? So that AA I came into, no one asked, well, what do you believe? What's your higher power? It was really just any question I asked, it got thrown back at me. If I went to my sponsor and said I had an issue with the word, it might not be God. It could be powerless. It could be insane. I don't think I'm insane. It could be anything. And he would always throw it back at me and say, well, you're the wordsmith genius. What word would you use? And I don't know that he was recognizing my acumen, but he was putting it back on my plate. What are you going to do with it, right? So, to this day, I don't even know exactly what he believed, because, he was more concerned about my recovery than, me modeling an exact way that he got sober.
So it simply was a case that it wasn't you thinking about in your head and letting your head govern your behavior or your beliefs. It was you extended it somewhere other than inside your head.
Yeah, for sure. It became very visceral. I didn't have hope, but the community of alcoholics, I borrowed from their hope. They said, Joe, if we can do it, you can do it. And I thought, maybe. And I hung around, and it was contagious. The hope was actually contagious. I didn't think I had the integrity to get sober. 12 steps, how could I even get to 4 before, I ended up, back at my drug of choice. And, so it was really, I was carried in a large way. And it was, all of us were helping others. It was the running mates. It wasn't just the 12-step meeting. It was the hanging out, having coffee, talking shit at night, or talking program at night, or talking about, will I ever get laid again? Or what am I going to do on New Year's Eve? Or, all of the things that people, care about that don't seem to be in the pamphlet.
Yeah. And so did you actually meet, were there some key people that you actually met when you formed your own concept of the higher purpose? Were there people that influenced you? Is there any books that you particularly read that had a profound effect on you when you were trying to find this?
When I came to AA, we were definitely not what I refer now to as a book-based society. Mm-hmm. And so the big book was there. That's how you knew you were at an AA meeting, because there was a book at the table where the chairperson and the secretary sat. So, I'm in an AA meeting. There it is. I assumed it was a good book. I just didn't know anyone who'd read it. No one quoted it. People didn't, you weaponize it, like, sort of use a quote out of the big book to put somebody else down. No one was anti-big book, but Living Sober had just come out. What was the other one that came out around that time? About finding higher powers or something, Came to Believe, I think it was called.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what people were reading. If people were going to pick something up off the shelf, they were going to read something by an AA member who was still alive. And again, no disrespect to the founders, but that's what was the common currency at the time. And so it was very fluid. It wasn't a buy the book. In fact, I don't know if there was a big book meeting in Montreal when I got sober. It was mostly speaker meetings, a few topic discussion meetings. If we read anything, it was Grapevine. It was maybe the 24-hour book from Hazelden, maybe Living Sober.
And well, there's a couple of questions. There is the big question that I want to ask you in a minute before we get to regarding the big book, before we all go crazy. But what I wanted to ask you is, did you find the wording in the big book, was there an issue with what you saw in the big book? Words like, when I just read it out there, and and again, this isn't, I don't have a problem with this, but there is the words that are used like him and God and stuff. Were those particularly an issue for you when those words were used? Was that an issue for you?
Well, remember, I came in as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very involved with the young people's movement, and really, as much as I owe my sobriety now to my association with atheists and agnostics, the secular AA movement. Most of the meetings I go to are that way, although I go to plenty of mainstream meetings. But the young people's groups made a big difference. And again, we were more interested in carrying the message to the next alcoholic. How could we make AA more inclusive? What was missing? It's not that we didn't, we just didn't bow at the altar of the great ones who came before us. We weren't interested in driving Dad's car. We wanted our own. And we were making AA our own. We were forming meetings. We were having conferences. And so that book just wasn't a big part of my recovery. In fact, I didn't read the big book, and this shocks anybody who got sober in the last decade, until I was sober 11 years. When I was sober 10 years, someone bought me Pass It On as an anniversary present for 10 years sobriety. A bunch of people in the group signed it, gave it to me. And I joked that I had something at 10 years I didn't have when I was new: an attention span. I could read a book. I wonder if my sobriety had depended on reading, whether I would have made it or not, because reading a pamphlet, I couldn't get through the whole thing. I was just too stir crazy. But I read about AA's history, and I got interested in it. And there were a lot of big book meetings in Toronto where I just moved to. And so I went and I read it. I remember we read first 164 pages. I thought that was good. And I'm looking at it as a historical book, not as a way to get sober. I'd worked the steps. Like I found it interesting. I found it poetic in ways, and I also found it very exclusive, because there were things that were just dead wrong, right? The idea that atheists believe there is no higher power. Agnostics can't decide. Those are very binary, descriptions that didn't really suit me or the people I knew. So, I didn't. It wasn't my fight, because my sobriety didn't rely on it. But I did find it. The idea, I still, in all these years, no one's ever said to me, Joe, I'm balking. There's all kinds of older language in there that, and we haven't even gotten into the patriarchy, the sort of heteronormative language of it, the American centricness of it. There's a lot of it that they were trying to be inclusive when they wrote it, I'm sure, but it was a product of its times, for sure.
So, because there's two parts to this question, I just want you to answer this really quickly, and this is the detonating question, like we said. This is the atomic question. Should the big book be rewritten?
Well, you wanted me to answer it quickly. I don't know if I can or will. It has. If the book Alcoholics Anonymous is the collective wisdom of AA members, well, that was written when AA was 3.5 years old, 4 years old. In 1973, they wrote Living Sober. That was 40 years of collective AA experience. It certainly wasn't a bestseller. It isn't, people didn't put the big book down and turn to Living Sober, but it is a secular look at AA life, how to stay sober 24 hours at a time. How important are meetings? It even talks about an updated medical opinion of alcoholism. It is in many ways an updated version of AA's collective experience. There are also others who didn't wait for general service. They wrote their own. Dale Kay wrote a book called The Secular Sobriety, which goes through 164 pages, and he just rewrites them in a modern vernacular. Archer Vox did the same thing with the Universal Big Book, I think he called it. So several people have actually done this already. Not to mention Maria Hornbacher, she's written about it, and many others. So it's been done. Should AA do it? I don't think it should be this sort of binary, burn all of these ones and start fresh. Because if someone wants to read the 1939 edition in their home group, I support them 100%. Their group is king. But for someone coming in, is it ideally suited to reach the broadest possible group of newcomers? I do not think so. And should it be rewritten? Maybe we just start with the most troublesome ones. Maybe to wives could be changed to loved ones, because it doesn't have the sacredness that how it works has, right? No, and you wouldn't get such a big fight over it. To employers, working with others. There's a number of chapters that maybe we could sort of pick around the edges. I'd be in favor of it, but I don't think it's one or the other. People are free to go and write what they want now, and people can read what they want in their meetings. And I see another book being more likely than a replacement book. But I would be all in favor of updating the language in the big book. It would just be hard to get 2 million people to agree on it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a couple of points that I'd like to make and put that to you is that, the First Vatican Council back in 800 AD or whatever it was, totally, from what I'm led to believe, now this is comes from my own study of religion that I've done pretty deep. They changed the Bible around quite a fair bit. They cut a lot of stuff out and they put a lot of stuff in. And again, I'm going to get burned and lynched for even saying that, but I just want to make that point. And I'm wondering whether we could be in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, is that if we start changing the language, the magic that's worked, and it ain't broken. It worked. The big book works. And I'm being devil's advocate here. That's again probably the wrong term, but once we start tinkering with something that works, are we in danger of the big book losing that thing? Because I can vouch personally, the big book helped me. I mean, there's no doubt it helped me. But I just want to put that to you. Is there a danger that we start losing the essential essence and the magic of the big book?
Well, it speaks to you and me. We're white, middle class, average blokes, right? But we shouldn't be in charge of the next version of it. It's got to be more inclusive in so many ways. And people need to understand the history a bit. This book is, if the pandemic's going to last a few more months and you're looking for an ambitious read, this is Bill Shaber's Writing the Big Book, The Creation of AA. It's 11 years of research about what actually happened in writing that book. And before we have a discussion about, what the big book is, what its place is in AA society, it behooves all of us to learn our history. And this actually dispels some of the myths that I've repeated. I heard them from others and I repeated them to others because it was coffee chat about how it was this collective wisdom. Really, it was two guys of the first 100 wanted the book written, Hank Parkhurst and Bill Wilson. The other 98 didn't think it was a good idea. They were against that book being written. So I'm not surprised that there's a large percentage of 2 million people that don't want a new book written. Did they want the 12 and 12 written? Probably not. Learning our history is hugely important. And we have to think about the role the book has in today's society. Like, it took 34 years to sell 1 million big books. Bill Wilson was already dead in his grave when we hit 1 million. And that would have been in the late 70s. And then by the early 80s, we were selling 1 million a year.
Mm.
So the AA I came into, they were selling 50,000 books a year, or it might have gone up to 100,000. So 1 in 6 members owned a book, right? And
Sure.
now we're producing 1 million every year. It's fallen off a little bit in the last few years, but they were going to hand out the 40th million copy of the big book at the World Convention in Detroit in 2020, which of course got canceled because of the pandemic. So it didn't become, we didn't become a book-based society until the second half of AA. Okay. And most people who've been sober in the last couple of decades, they walked into probably a big book room is what they know AA to be. But it wasn't always that way.
So do you think that there is a danger? Is that what people are afraid of, though? Is that what I've just explained to you? Is that the fear, I think, from the general consensus of, I would estimate the majority of people who are in recovery in AA would shiver, would scream out and be, send thunderbolts and lightning out of their fingertips to even dare to that we would change the big book, such as it's like you said, a sacred text, right, for want of a better word. Do you think that's where the fear is? Is that where the fear comes, that they don't want to change it because it'll lose its power?
Resisting change, AA is not religious in terms of being structured like a formal religion, but the idea of a higher power, especially one called God, that's an idea that AA borrowed from religion. That is a religious construct. And for people who have a hard time with the whole idea of a supernatural recovery coming from some outside agency, the writing of the big book is a problem. I got sober without having to fight with the language in the big book because I didn't read it. But I see people, I see new people, younger people, certainly any feminist would have a hard time with it. Anyone from a non-Judeo-Christian culture, a lot of it wouldn't make sense to them. So I think the sort of liberal narrative of AA is that we're always inclusive, never exclusive. Yes. Sure. So if that is true, then there must be at least some people who are in favor of a more inclusive language in it. But again, I don't know that we have to go to, okay, that's it. Everybody turn in your big books. They're now banned at AA meetings. Nothing is sacred and nothing is forbidden in AA. So if they want to read the Bible in their meeting, other groups can object, but they can't shut them down for doing it.
Of course. So do you think that if it was changed and we got rid of things like, and I think the 2 wives thing is a good example, and 2 employers is a good example because it is certainly dated, but that's my opinion.
How about a doctor's opinion from the 21st century?
Yeah, but do you think that if we cleaned it up, say, if that's the right word, that's probably the wrong word, but if we did sort of make it less kind of its time, would we attract more members? Would more members stay? Would the percentage of people who come back to the second and third and fourth meeting, and with the general level numbers of sobriety, would that increase? Is that your belief?
That's a good question, because I mentioned I came into an AA that was growing. I got here, we were 500,000 members. Then we were 1 million members. Then we were 2 million members. That's 1991. We 10% up and down. Our membership hasn't grown since then. Is that a problem because of the literature? I don't know that to be an absolute fact. I have said that if in 2035, whatever of AA is left is huddled around the same 164 pages exactly as written, AA will be at that time like the Amish or the Mennonites. We will be considered quaint, harmless, and irrelevant. Right. That's a possibility, but you know, the other argument is, well, you know, they haven't changed Shakespeare to hip hop language. Wouldn't kids
That's
enjoy it
true.
more if it was more progressive?
Yeah.
You know, so you know, I think there's the answer has to be, let's make sure everybody gets what they need, as opposed to a winner in this fight and a loser in this fight.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I'm going to quickly move on because I'm going to finish all my sort of really boring questions, and I'm going to open up. So I'm going to ask people, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question of Joe. We've already got a couple of panel members who've got their hands up, but if you want to do that, please put it in chat that you want it, or raise your hand in the participants column. So these are just a couple of the general more questions, just going back to the higher power thing. So where are you on the atheist odometer or the spiritual odometer? Are you kind of full core atheist, or are you sort of moderately atheist moving to agnostic, if I was a weatherman?
Well, when I sort of I'm talking to someone, I always sort of, and I'm trying to communicate with them. There's two things. There's one is worldview, and consider like a north and a south. North is a natural worldview. South would be a supernatural worldview. Someone believes in a creator God. Someone believes in science and evolution. That's it, right? But also on the east-west, there's concrete thinkers, people who reason in a concrete way, and abstract thinkers, people who figure things out in a more abstract way. So all of the great debates come from the concrete thinkers, right? The concrete theists, the concrete supernaturalists arguing with the concrete atheists, right? Because obviously you're wrong, obviously we're right, yada, yada, yada. And the abstract thinkers, some people I know call themselves apatheists. Don't know, don't care, right? Not interesting. Can we talk about recovery? Because it's my cravings I really want to talk about, not, I don't want to answer the questions, the existential questions of the universe. I want to get sober, right? So I would call myself on the abstract side of things. And I would love concrete answers to all of the abstract questions in life, but that's just not how this planet seems to spin around. And I would consider myself probably an 8 out of 10 atheists. You know, there's 2 out of 10 per, 20% chance I'm dead wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my recovery, and I would, like from a scientific free thinker's point of view, show them they're wrong, they'll happily change their position. But you've got to bring evidence, right? And I would like to think that I would go, well, joke's on me. Hi, God. But I haven't had the experience of anything supernatural in all of my recovery. I've had an experience as a result of doing the steps. I don't call it a spiritual experience. Other people might call it that. I don't know what they mean by that word.
Would you regard it as a miracle, though, that you're sober?
No.
No.
Cause and effect.
Okay. Fair enough. So then would I be right in saying that you don't believe in life after death, or you just don't believe in God, or both?
Both. Yeah. I believe in the here and now. I believe, to quote the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. Like this idea of an afterlife, that must come from ego. Like God as we understand him sounds a lot to me like God of my own imagination, right? I mean, doing drugs, we would sit and talk about, did God create man in his image, or did man create God in our image? Blah, blah, blah. And I can't remember what we concluded, but we thought we were pretty smart, right? So this continues at coffee shops and AA meetings, right? But we do have this conception, but I think that comes from the gut. It's internalized. But I also see these sort of seemingly supernatural things that I can't explain, and maybe science will explain them one day. So I got to say, I don't know. I only see through these 2 little frames, and it's not the whole world. It's just my perceptions.
I think one of the most poignant things I heard for a long time was David Attenborough, the famous naturalist who said, that if he was an ant inside a huge ant's nest and somebody came along, cut it in half, he wouldn't know what that was, but he'd be open-minded to find out if it was a man or a tiger or a lion. And I think it was, and he describes himself as an agnostic simply on those terms, that he's open-minded. And I love that analogy. So I think being open-minded, I guess, that's what you're saying, is that you're kind of pretty sure, but you're not sure.
People sort of grab words as their own. And I think free thinker should belong to anybody. You can be a literalist, a biblical believer, and be a free thinker, I think, where you make room for others and their beliefs, and that'd be fine. But it's been a word that's been sort of grabbed by the non-believers. But I think there are plenty of very open-minded believers, and I think there are some very religious atheists that want to get religion out of school. It's child abuse. Want to get religion out of the big book. It's malarkey, is that helping? That's what I want to know.
Okay,
helping someone. Carry on.
Okay, so finally, and this is the question I just wanted to ask, and I don't want to create, again, I just wanted to say to everyone who's here that this is totally an open-minded live and let live meeting. We're all we're trying to do is to convey understanding and tolerance and everyone getting along and having empathy. But I wanted to just ask you, Joe, is that, can you relate, and I've got a good friend in this room, actually, Eugene from Ireland, whom I respect a great deal, and he's been sober 42 years or 43 years himself, and I guess he would profess himself to be along similar lines to you, maybe. And he's relayed to me some of the examples of the intolerance that he's endured when he's been into meetings, particularly in his part of the world in Ireland, which we don't need to go into. I'm sure everyone understands that. Can you relay what it's like in meetings when you go in there and then people realize what your abstract beliefs are?
Sure.
Yeah.
You see, I say that I didn't arrive in AA as a book-based society, but we have become a book-based society. And most book-based societies divide into two camps. There's the preserve the integrity of the message camp and the widening the gateway camp. And so people who have the, sort of preserve the integrity of the message camp, they consider themselves stewards of AA, and they don't like treatment talk, and they don't like this secular AA stuff, and they believe that if you don't find God, you're not going to get sober. They've never been to a smart recovery meeting or a refuge recovery meeting. They think AA is the last house on the block. Look around, there's a whole subdivision out there of people finding recovery without the 12-step model. And even in AA, plenty of people don't finish the 12 steps or dismiss them completely and still find their way in AA. And they're great examples of how AA works. They're helpful with other people, so on and so forth. So I've seen this, and it's on both sides, because the widening the gateway camp think that it's these literalists that are holding AA back, that we would be far better off if we just, blow it all up, start from scratch, a modern, contemporary vernacular, let's go for it. So there's, but that's a smaller group. One of the things I've studied a lot is underrepresented populations in AA. And because secular people are an underrepresented population, many of them, you can't be indigenous and hide it necessarily, just depending on your skin tone. You can't be a woman and hide it, almost certainly, but you can be an atheist and hide it. And there are some people that have to hide they have to compromise their integrity to fit in, because they want authenticity, but they also want acceptance. And in order to be authentic, they're going to be shunned as a member of an out group. And in order to be included in the in group, they've got to talk in God acronyms, I call it, right? Just sort of dance around some of this stuff, or hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer, right? And I can't see how sobriety can last without integrity. So what are you going to do, right? But yeah, there's become a mean-spiritedness. The polarization in AA is just the same as we see in politics.
Yes.
You know, the UK, America, everywhere, right? You know, that, but
Mm.
most of AA, I think, is in the middle. It just the loudest voices are the ones on the fringes, right? Because there are plenty of mainstream AA meetings that are very inclusive, that I can say, I don't believe in a prayer answering, sobriety granting higher power, and no one's going to thump their big book or ask me to leave or tell me, why don't you go start your own fellowship? But there are people like that, and that's microaggression. Why don't you go start your own fellowship? Is means hit the road, Jack. That's what that means. You're making me uncomfortable. Get out. And that's human nature. I don't think we're going to solve that with any book.
No. Just get back to my point. Have you ever been thrown out of a meeting?
My group got thrown out of the Toronto meeting list because we were an agnostic atheist group. And that was a bit of a stir. And it was one of the most heartbreaking things that ever happened to me, because I came in young. I was always considered a rebel rouser, sort of a fringy kind of guy, right? Always trying to push the envelope, but always tolerated. You know, at the end of the day, we're all here for the same purpose. And then when I heard that Intergroup was going to vote on whether atheist agnostic groups should be included, I thought, okay, everyone's going to air their dirty laundry and say their thing and blah, blah, blah. And AA is going to do the right thing. But they didn't. They voted us out. Now, understand, the General Service Office didn't even blink an eye at agnostic atheist meetings. We were still welcome at the district table. We were still welcome in the area, but we weren't in the meeting list. And the law of unintended consequences had its say, because they kicked out 2 meetings. And by the time they got us back in, we were also the only 2 meetings in all of Canada. There were 40 secular AA meetings in Canada by the time we were reinstated. And now it's page 8 news. There isn't anyone at Intergroup who even remembers a time that the atheist agnostic groups were excluded. But it was heartbreaking. I felt like I'd been betrayed by my family. And I grew up in AA. And you know, like I'm sober longer than most of the people who kicked me out. And I got nothing to offer. You know, I get 1 vote just like you. That's how AA works. I accept that. But that was heartbreaking. And the sort of mean-spiritedness that I do see in AA, sort of weaponizing 12 steps with very vulnerable people, I think it's destructive. And I would like to see more inclusivity, of course, but you can find that in meetings. You got to shop around to find your people.
Yeah, thank you. So listen, that's enough for me. So I'm going to go to James. James, would you like to ask a question? He's a panel member. Over to you, James.
Thanks a lot, David. Yeah, I want to just say thank you, Joe. It's been an honor to listen to you. And I got so fired up early on that I stuck my hand up way before you were done. But by now I've heard so many other things that I'll try to be real concise. But early on you were talking about something that reminded me, you know, I live in a place in Florida that used to have a lot of people from Canada come down during the winter. And they would bring a whole fresh style of AA that kind of enlivened our little community. And from one of the people in there, I learned that the genesis of our recovery program in modern times had a lot to do with what they discovered with people returning from World War I who were shell-shocked. And that's where this idea of peer counseling sort of evolved from. When they were all put together, they recovered quicker than when they were being treated by psychologists and other people that didn't understand their condition. So we go through that same thing here in AA, and that's what started to open up this idea of a higher power, because something seems to happen when we get together, and it doesn't seem to have a lot to do with what we talk about. I love AA. I love the paradoxes and the ironies, because I agree and disagree with almost everything you've said. I feel like, you know, in the big book, it says things that disqualifies itself whenever it gets itself stuck in a timely space or in a dated space. It says God gave us brains to use. You know, we learn to live on more of an intuitive basis. You know, tolerance is our creed. You know, I think I'm probably misquoting that, but it 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 negates the areas where it then starts to use the language that it could only use, because I've had conversations with people about non-duality and it gets almost impossible to speak, because every time you use a word, you're using a dualistic concept of some kind and the whole conversation gets negated. I don't know what point I'm trying to make, except that I just found you to be quite fearless and courageous. And I really came into an AA that seemed to have all of this stuff in it that you're talking about, but it seemed to be tolerant of all of it. There was people that could not say, could not identify themselves without also identifying the fact that they referred to their higher power as God. Where there's also people that insisted that they were agnostic or atheist, but had some of the most deeply spiritual things to say. And to close, I was really lucky to have an old timer sponsor, but he took me through the big book. And also when I would have questions about surrender, he would refer me to the 81 verses in the Tao, or maybe a page in A Course in Miracles. So he was using all of this stuff in an inclusive way. And I feel like that's what you're promoting. And I'm very much for it. So.
When you were talking, you made me think of what I think the essence of AA is: one alcoholic talking to another. Bill Wilson had a white life experience, but it wasn't keeping him sober in a bar in Akron. He needed another drunk to talk to. And he didn't arrive with a book. It was just one alcoholic talking to another. And all of these things, it's good to put it, it's good to codify things. It's good to write them down. It's good to share it. It's good to be multimedia. It's good to have podcasts, right? But it's all a variation of that one alcoholic talking to another, because when you and I share our experiences, we're going to be nodding and agreeing. When I try to explain how the world works, whoa, right? You know, so this Ward Ewing, he was a non-alcoholic, a reverend. He was the chairman of the General Service Conference and board, and he wrote an article in the Grapevine where he said, experience trumps explanation, because we have this shared experience of addiction and recovery, but we explain how it happened differently. But if it was a silent movie, it'll look the same in my atheist meeting or somebody else's big book meeting.
Well, just to close, and thank you. I do often share with sponsees that in the big book it says some things have to be experienced to be understood. They can't be transmitted or explained. And that just leaves this huge open space for, as my friend Frank Z would say, a crack where the light gets in, I think. Anyway, thanks for opening up my mind, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, dude. Cheers, James.
Thank you.
And just to say, before I go to Kaiser, there's our other panel member, just to say that we're here every Friday. We do the same thing, like I say, with all sorts of different people. Next week, we're going from one extreme to the other. We've got Trishna, who's coming on to talk about the Divine Mother and the 12 steps. So strap yourself in for that one, and please come along, even if you are agnostic and atheist or open-minded. These meetings are fantastic, and we do have some tremendous speakers. So come back here every Friday. And just to say, we are on this is going to be recorded as a podcast. It'll be on Spotify and iTunes probably by tomorrow, and we'll also be on YouTube if you want to rewatch some of Joe's great dialogue here. Kaiser, you got a question there, mate?
I do. Hi, Kaiser Alcoholic. I know this isn't an AA meeting, but I'll identify as one anyway, so you know where my perspective's coming from. Joe, we've connected before. I don't want to interject any more of me in this question, but it's me. And I, like you, sobered up young, and I understand the stuff that you're talking about. And the most important thing in this sobriety is to be able to offer it to someone and have them discover their sobriety. And I've asked some people that sobered up without AA how they did that, because that's important. And also ask people who are atheist or agnostic how that works with them, because that's very important should I come across someone who operates in that. And I know that it's only you, so you can't speak on behalf of a whole society. Mm-hmm. My understanding is my sobriety is based on a higher power operation of flowing. That was what actually enabled me to be sober. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm coming from. And I see some people that are atheist or agnostic utilizing intellect. And in my experience, that would be, I would caution them against that. And yet there are people that have atheism or agnosticism, and they do recover. And that's the most important thing. Is a higher power or some other form of understanding that beyond the intellect, in your experience, a necessary component to sobriety?
That comes in the explanation part of it. Is it necessary in the experience of recovery? Of course not. Some people do and some people don't. And the people who, their natural explanation is that I couldn't do it on my own, I was hopeless, I surrendered, a power greater than myself has restored me to sanity. I'm not going to fight them on the, we're not going to deconstruct that, right? That is their experience, and I accept it as much as I accept my own truth as being true for them, for sure. But it's the explanation, not the experience.
All righty, thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming for that. And next, now we're going to go to the audience, and just to remind everyone, just to be respectful. As I say, this is all about open-mindedness and being tolerant and empathy. So if there's anything nasty you want to say, then you'll be quickly removed from the meeting, just so you know. So, but we are open to all sorts of different opinions and stuff. So as long as you're respectful, that's okay. Kenji, have you got a question? You have to unmute there, mate. There you go.
There we go. Hi, yeah. I'm Kenji. And thanks. This has been an amazing discussion so far. I've actually been taking notes because there have been so many interesting things mentioned that I want to think about and maybe even write about later. I'm an AA member, but for a few years I shifted over to NA. So I'm familiar with their literature, and it's interesting. Their basic text was, unlike the Big Book, is the collective, like the Big Book, is a collective view of the NA Fellowship, but it was not written by a singular author the way the Big Book was. And in my opinion, it's not a very good book, because literally what they did is they solicited input from the membership, and then it seems to me pretty obvious they cut and pasted paragraph by paragraph what many different people wrote, and it doesn't read very well. But and it doesn't have the same music that the Big Book has. They later wrote there's a much more recent book that I believe it's called Living Clean and Journey Continues. And it's a much better book, in my humble opinion. And they did hire a professional writer to write it. So I'm thinking that probably the battles that would ensue, one of the other things that was talked about here was polarization. And I can only imagine what the polarized war would be like over rewriting the Big Book. So I suspect that what will end up happening is it'll remain as it is, as a historical document, and that hopefully there'll be a new book written by a gifted writer. So something like The Journey Continues. And so I'm wondering what you think about the whole question of authorship of some new book going forward.
Well, yeah, the one of the myths that was broken by William Schaberg's work is that it was this collective effort, and really most of AA didn't think we needed a book. It was just one alcoholic talking to another, right? And you know, we talk about polarization. I believe, from what I hear, the New York meeting, when AA only had 2 meetings, the New York meeting was a very different experience than the Akron meeting. One was way more religious than the other one was. And so maybe a collection of stories like Grapevine seems to do is the ultimate way, just people sharing their experience, as opposed to every time AA shares its experience, it brings in new members. Every time we try to point our finger and tell someone how to do things, we get blowback, right? And so that, I think, is the key. Let's stick to our experience, whether it's a collective thing or individually. We'll leave that to whoever is left fighting in this, are we going to rewrite the big book or not question, right? But yeah, and I do like that. Living Clean is a great book. It was written in 2012, so obviously it talks in a modern vernacular, and it talks about we atheists and agnostics, not those atheists and agnostics. So I feel very included when I read the more modern literature.
Okay, thanks very much. Next question to James in Cleveland. Over to you, mate. I'm asking you to unmute.
Right. I actually have a couple comments. As I indicated when I first came on, my mind is always open for what I need to hear, and I need to hear a lot of things about change, because that's one of the biggest things that I see in the process. Like you was mentioning, the time frames and how you had cut it up into 2 parts. The part you came in, I came in the latter part, which was the beginning of the 80s, and it was different. And now you see a lot of like indifference in that because there's drugs talked about in the big book, some people interpret that to mean you could talk about it in an AA meeting. And depending on the meeting, you can. But for the most part, I just want to say those subject matter or the story changes. I was just in a discussion yesterday, and this is just as far as my mind would let me go yesterday. The question was, what if you could change something in the big book, what would you? Me, I said personal stories, but I never thought about the stories to the wives. Hey, that makes sense. They're not wives. I've never had a wife, but I've had loved ones that my alcoholism affected. You know what I mean? To the employers, wait a minute. What if you're self-employed? You know what I mean? So again, I just want to say thank you for the enlightenment, because I just love obtaining things and knowledge that I don't previously have. Because I like working with these people when they come here. And, you know, if someone comes here and they have a mental health issue, but they really like what I present to them as an AA member, and I say I can't sponsor him or her because of their condition, that's not being fair. So I like to embrace whatever it is. I mean, if you go start another meeting talking about drugs, even though it's not an AA or NA meeting, that's fine. I'll come over there, listen, just to get that knowledge.
Okay.
So when that person needs it, nobody else seems to know that atheists and agnostics are sober. I know that they're sober because I go in their groups and I sit there and I listen to them. And man, do they make a whole lot of sense. You know, in fact, I have a close friend who He doesn't identify as either atheist or agnostic. He just does not believe. And I mean, we argued for about 10 minutes. And I said, Brent, just leave it alone. They'll never understand. Their minds are not open to people like you. That's all that is. It's just like when we were drinking. You know, if they were drinking wine and I like to drink whiskey and I needed a drink, I wasn't gonna say
James,
no.
sorry, excuse me, James, mate. We've got quite a few hands up, mate. So can we finish it up?
Yeah, I'm finished. I just
All
wanted
right.
to basically say thank you.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate it, mate. Thank you so much. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, because we I know, Joe, you're okay to hang on for a bit then, are you?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so thanks, James. That was fantastic. Next,
Yep, we're all in this
Amy,
together,
who's a
James.
regular. I think she's got a question about traditions. Amy, over to you. It's good to see you.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. Yes, it
Yeah.
is good to see you. And yeah, there's just a lot that you talked about that I really appreciated. And I want to ask you about your feelings on the traditions, where you study them from, if you study them, where their places in AA and in other life. But I do want to make a quick comment about you. You gave me some vocabulary around an issue that happened with me and my former home group, and I before COVID was really struggling with some of the exact things you were talking about. And then, my AA was really pretty small at that point. It was within Kansas City, right? Since COVID happened, my AA experience is really big, right? I have AA experience all over the world. Obviously, that's where I come from. And now I have some vocabulary to sort of process what happened with my home group and that mean spiritedness and that weaponizing. And that's not to maybe weaponize back at that group, but to help me process what happened. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Traditions, if that had been the topic today, that would have been great. Like we know, the third tradition is there's only one requirement for membership, and it's not a belief in anybody else's worldview. The fourth one is every group is autonomous. Every group is asked to consider AA as a whole, but the ultimate authority for that group and what they read, nothing's sacred, nothing's forbidden, they decide. And tradition 5 has an interesting 3-letter word, and that is that every group has about one primary purpose: to carry its message. There's no the message. There's no the AA. It just, every group has to decide what is our purpose. And a young people's group is going to be different than a women's group. And a men's stag big book group is going to be different than an atheist agnostic group. But they're all doing it right, and they're all getting people sober. I haven't found a group yet that gets everybody sober. And when I do, I'll encourage our group to do what their group is doing.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Cheers, Amy. It's so good to see you. Thanks for coming along every week. It's really lovely to see you. Now, Campion asked me a question in chat. So, Campion, would you like to ask your question, please?
Sure. Thanks again, Joe. I really appreciate hearing what you've had to say. And funny little coincidence, I bought your book about 3 weeks ago, not knowing you wrote it and not knowing you'd be here today. So I just want to say, first of all, so much about when we talk about these things, it's about our definitions, how we define the words. You know, I've always believed in God, but I define God differently than most people do. A lot of people would say my definition of God is agnostic or atheistic, but still to me, it's God, you know. So my question is, what would you like, or how would you like the fellowship to be in 2030 or 2035 if your conscience were the group conscience? Like, what do you have a vision for where you'd like the fellowship to go in the next 15 years or so?
More inclusive. Like if we could be, and I'm not talking to GSO or to your group. I'm going to say this to my group: how can we be more inclusive? right? And in my atheist agnostic group, we better not be rolling our eyes at religious belief. We don't know who's in there. Could be someone new who believes in God, right? Do we want them to feel excluded the way we did? All of AA could stand to be more inclusive. Stop watching CNN or CBC or whatever sort of gets us fired up, right? And just remember, when it comes right down to it, we're all alcoholics. We're a collection of people who are bound by common suffering. That's what Bill Wilson used to describe the fellowship of AA. So let's remember that, right? This isn't a popularity contest. We're not the cool kids. We're just trying to help other alcoholics, right?
Would that include, just if I can come in on the end of that, would that inclusivity mean people with other addictions as well as not just with alcohol?
That's a group by group decision, isn't it? And I think that an AA group is what the members decide it's going to be. And other groups might object. Hey, people identify there as crack addicts. They're not saying alcoholic. Well, if that makes you uncomfortable, click another Zoom meeting. Okay. Right? Okay. Like there are things that make me uncomfortable in meetings, right? Whose problem is that? That's mine, and I can solve it. But yeah, I think that's up to the group. It's
okay, like it. Thank you very much, Campion. Good to see you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Now, Jerry has had his hand up for a while. Jerry, over to you in Montreal.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Jerry and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, mate.
And I heard you, Joe, and I really associated with you when you talked about Montreal. I'm 8 years sober and proud to be an atheist. I'm the guy that the guys in the AA like to bash, and when they desperately try really hard to tell newcomers that they won't survive without God, and when the person persists, they find out that I exist, they come to me. I'm also proud to tell you that things are changing in Montreal. I'm part of the CPC, where we promote AA with professionals, doctors, and we speak in universities and that, and it's part of something that Bill Wilson created back in the day. And we were told by Area 87 not to promote AA when we're talking in front of the people, or not to promote God when we're talking in front of professionals, because it turns them away. On the other hand, I'm trying really hard to start meetings that cater to other people. And we were officially told by Area 87 to back down. And if we want to continue, we'll have to create our own fellowship, which is not associated with AA. So we've got the yin yang effect like you had in Toronto or have in Toronto as well, but we're trying really hard. We're open-minded. I don't dislike people that are religious. I'm open-minded, and I believe that they have their own rights and everybody else does. I'm just dreaming of the day that we will get the full go-ahead and be recognized by AA area in Montreal and be in the meeting list. Thank you so much, Joe, and I appreciate what you've said.
So Jerry, just come in there. So are you saying that you're still enduring a lot of the stuff that Joe's mentioned before in his early days? So that still goes on?
It still goes on. Yes, it absolutely does. Because in the same way, General Service isn't going to tell my group, you're out of here. You can't be an AA group because you let people identify as addicts, or because you're atheist and agnostics, or you read a version of the 12 steps, which wasn't the one Bill Wilson wrote. General Service isn't going to do that. They're also not going to tell an intergroup office or central office how to conduct their local affairs. That's going to have to be worked out amongst the local. So there are places where systemic discrimination, sort of hostility actually still takes place. The arcing curve generally comes around. Like I remember when LGBTQ plus meetings were, well, why do you need a special meeting, right? What are you going to talk about in your meeting that we wouldn't talk about in ours? And, nobody even talks about that anymore. It just takes time.
Let me tell you, they do. And I know that for a fact that they do. And I run a Facebook page, which is called AA Zoom Global List. And every time we post a women's meeting or an LGBTQ meeting, there's always the comment that comes, it's a fellowship for men and women, isn't it? So, yeah, so it's still there. I get that. But I didn't realize it was still at that level anyway, so I'm, again, no judgment.
I mean, we were talking about traditions earlier, and traditions aren't rules either. They're not instructions. They're collective experience of AA. We had some problems. Here's what happened. Here's what we recommend. AA has no rules, but there are people in every Zoom group that will line up and explain them to you.
Okay, yeah, I'm down with it. Anyway, let's move on. So thank you very much. It's really good, Jerry. Really lovely to see you, mate. Thank you very much for that. And best wishes, mate. Good luck to you. Yeah, so fantastic. So who we got? Neil in Virginia. How are you? Good to see you, mate.
Hi, I'm Neil in Virginia.
Hey, man.
And I'm all kinds of things, including alcoholics and addicts and whatever.
Yeah.
I guess not so much a question, but I'm sorry that what happened in Toronto broke Joe's heart. But it opened up the world for me and tons of other people. So it just like this pandemic, us agnostics and stuff, I was going to Zoom meetings before because I can't go to meetings where I live because they're hardcore Christian fundamentalist meetings. I just can't go. So but then when the pandemic came, the people with 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 years of sobriety that have continued going to meetings the whole time, they didn't know we existed either. So this is just exploded. So it's too bad that it takes something bad for me personally for something good to come out of it. And I just think this is wonderful. And I don't have problems with believers. I got sober in traditional AA, and I got to differentiate a little bit because I got sober in traditional AA and inside the Beltway in DC. I didn't get sober in fundamentalist AA, which is what they have where I live now in rural Appalachia. It's not the same thing. Plus, I was young, and like Joe said, I didn't know what a big book was. I thought the big book was the Bible. I didn't even know what they were talking about, So I just want to reiterate that the fact that the bad stuff has happened, there's some good that's come out of it, and in my opinion, a ton of good. And I've met all these people from all over the world. And anyway, that's all I really got. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to be clear, for me, is that I got sober. I have a higher power of my own understanding, and I don't agree with you guys, but I love everyone, and I want it to be this way. Then, because I think we make for a better world, not just in AA, everywhere. And I think it's important to remember that it's different strokes for different folks, and whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon said, as long as you stay sober, as far as I'm concerned. So just to reiterate, this isn't we're not going to go around bashing different religions and stuff like that. It's entirely up to those, it's each to their own, live and let live, etc. So thank you very much for that, Neil. Wonderful to see you, mate. Thank you. Neil in Burlington.
Thank you very much. Very much. Love this. Good to see you, Joe. Excellent. As Bob Dylan would say, times they are a-changing. Nothing is certain as the certainty of constant change. I don't know where I got that one. We're not all that intelligent. Listen, my higher power for close to 50 years cooked my dinner and did my laundry. Oh, yes. I knew exactly who my higher power was, or I went hungry and naked. Anyway, there you go. I've been sober for 34 years. I've been through an ups and downs. For the first 40 years, I had no spiritual or religious tuning. I watched my father, who had some background in that. So I had nothing until one time it came that I was feeling empty, and through being next to the fellow I worked with, who was going on to be a a minister, which he did, and I was with him for a year, and he gave me something I needed, and that was I thought at the time was a religious experience, deep, for about a year, and I went phenomenal with it. I was 100% a religious fanatic, damn near wiped out the family and everybody that came near me. I wanted to get sober so bad that a couple of years later, when I came into AA, I was at a crossroads. I didn't know what, I didn't want to stay in this religious, I couldn't live this way, but AA told me I had to do some acceptance or I couldn't get sober. So there I was, I at crossroads again. So I stayed, of course, to get sober. And I was deep in all the books. I read As Bill Sees It 4 times a week. You know, I mean, really, I wanted to get sober. But as time went on, it decreased. The AA dogma and all that decreased. I was not happy. I was sober, but I was miserable. I didn't understand things. I couldn't hand it anymore as the years went by. Well, what do you know? What comes up for me but these secular meetings, and I fall into place like I'm supposed to, like I want to, like I feel it. I belong here. Okay? You know, if am I a complete atheist? I am of the opinion that none of us know exactly whether there is a God or not. You can believe what you want. I will leave that door open 1%. That's it. That's it. Otherwise, from what I've experienced, what I've had to endure or felt, and there's a good side to it that comes out of it always. Out of the ashes comes something new. And anyway, I could say that I could not take on a sponsor now at an AA meeting. I can't do it. It's not me anymore. I couldn't go through the big book, you know.
Neil, so mate, if there's a little question I want to ask, because we've got a load of hands up, mate. So if you don't mind, I don't mean to be rude, with great respect, but if you've got a little question, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, I was just getting to my question here. I just wanted to say something here that I have seen people who have been in the church and couldn't get what they want, came into AA and found it. I've seen people and talked to them who've been in AA, couldn't find what they want, went into church and found it. So, you know, it's no exclusive. My question, Joel, is, are the non-white Anglo-Saxon alcoholics being serviced generally? I don't hear much about them. I don't. I'm not in the circle that you run, obviously. Are they being attended to?
Cheers, Neil.
I'm glad you brought that up, Neil. And like atheists and agnostics are one underrepresented population in AA. AA has been in Toronto, where we live, a multicultural city, which answers 911 calls in 150 native tongues. Our meetings look like it's 1950 Toronto. It's very Anglo-Saxon. It's you know, and that's NA is way more diverse. I don't know why AA seems to still be you know, sort of white Protestant sort of, and Catholic, you know, so and that is something that I suspect there is something in our rituals and our practices that is making some people feel included and welcome, and other people feeling not included. And I hope we find a solution for it.
That's wonderful. Cheers, Neil. That was a fantastic question, mate. Thank you very much. Now, my friend David from Los Angeles. How are you, mate? Good to see you. You've got a question or something to say?
Hello, thank you, David, and hello, Joe, and everyone. Just a quick question, Joe. A couple of years back, AA Grapevine published One Big Tent, which is a book by and for atheist and agnostic members of AA fellowship, our fellowship. What do you think of that book?
I think it's terrific. We also have, thanks to the UK, we have a pamphlet called The God Word, Atheists and Agnostics.
Yes.
The US-Canada General Service Office tried 11 times to create a pamphlet of stories written by atheists, agnostics, for atheists and agnostics, and couldn't get it past the finish line. And the UK did it, boom, and we've adopted it. It's now in 3 languages. And that book by Grapevine is a great collection. It's a great archive of the history of non-believers in AA. It's a great resource. I hope there will be another one, because I hope there will be more stories. If there are people out here who complain, I don't like Grapevine, it's too this or it's too that, they can only choose from the stories that are sent to them, right? So write them and it'll get better. But that was healing, very healing when Grapevine put that book out, and it means a lot to me. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, thank you, David. Namaste. Good to see you, mate. Now, David P., over to you.
Hi, how you doing? I guess a couple questions, and they kind of fold into one another. Like, what would you suggest I could do at my home group to make it more inclusive for people that are agnostic or atheist? And then the other part is like, around where I'm at, I'm in Jersey, and there are quite a few people here that, it's like, if you don't get God, you're not going to get sober. And what would you say to them, if anything, in order to, I don't know, maybe broaden the meeting, or, if somebody had a problem with that, the God word, or, what would you say to them to help them, I guess, stay?
The number one thing I hear from people who come and then leave AA is the prayers in a meeting. And I think the responsibility declaration is a great way for everyone to join in and say something. And it's AA written, right? It was created by AA. It's ours and ours alone. And the Lord's Prayer, again, every group that wants to say it, keep saying it. But that is one of the things, one of the rituals in an AA meeting that people will come to and go, whoa, I'm not included in this crowd. These are not my people. Just making just reviewing the rituals of the meeting and just seeing what could be altered or improved to just make it more inclusive. Because if someone's a Hindu, the Lord's Prayer doesn't make any sense to them. If someone's a Muslim, if someone's an atheist, it doesn't make any sense to them. And we sound like we're two-faced, right? We say we're inclusive, we say we're spiritual, not religious, but these are the things that people judge us by. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know, but they don't come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Now back to Jeb in Aurora. Over to you, man.
Am I
Hey,
unmuted?
Yes, you are, mate.
Okay, thanks so much, David. My name is Jeb, and I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic.
Hey, man.
And hiding out in AA meetings, as I did at the beginning. Thank you so much for this provocative, open-minded discussion about the recovery process. And as I've suggested to you many times, I think you're the right person to write the next book, which is the varieties of recovery experience. One of the things that's really on my mind through all of this is, something I heard is no one person speaks for AA as a whole, and sure as hell you can't. And sure as hell, Bill Wilson had no business trying to speak for AA as a whole, past, present, and future. What do you think is we can do to get people to read that book, if they read it all, in the context of the 1930s, the kind of audience that he was writing for, who had a worldview drastically different from the 21st century and drastically different from mine, that thing that he claimed, or the founders claimed, was they had there was a common problem and a common solution. We know much better. The problem is very complex and expresses it in a lot of different addictions and behaviors, but and the solution, therefore, is just as multivariate as the problem. So can you respond in some way there by writing that book or right now? Thank you.
Yeah, but I think you're onto something about experiences, and every group could write their own book of the members' experiences and use that as a reading thing as they go along, and it would be local, it would be up to date, it would be current. We're great storytellers. All of us are great storytellers. It's the essence of Alcoholics Anonymous. And more of that and less instruction, and we're going to get along fine.
Brilliant. He's going to hold you to writing that book, I think. You're not going to be let go of that, mate. You better get dust off the old typewriter, I think. I think that's the general gist I'm getting from a few people here. So Mark, last question to Mark. Over to you, mate.
Okay, thank you for the meeting or the podcast, sorry. Joe, thank you, great listening to you, sir. In your opinion, what is being sober, can I ask? And the best way to get involved with AA rather than going to meetings and service?
What is being sober is the question?
Yeah, in your opinion. After hearing about 20 fucking definitions, lad, and it's starting to bother me.
Yeah, I honestly believe that sobriety has to be self-defined. There are people in Alcoholics Anonymous who are under medically assisted recovery. They're on Suboxone, they're on SSRIs, they're on mute, and now more and more of these drugs that are based on marijuana are going to be in our meetings, and people are going to be using them. I think that is such a personal decision that we cannot say this is what sobriety looks like. If you don't meet this threshold, you're not a legitimate AA member. It has to be, just as higher power is of our own understanding, sobriety has to be of our own understanding. If I'm lying to myself, it's not going to hurt my group, but it's going to hurt me, and I'm going to have to rewrite that definition. But everyone's got to do it for themselves, and I've seen a lot of hurt over that with some bad advice and some unnecessary shame going around. But that's a very good question, Mark.
Wow. Thank you very much, Mark. And so I think we'll start wrapping it up there. So I've just got one more question I want to ask you. It's a bit of a fun question we start up, but I did want to relay something that if you're interested, everyone, on the Here's Tom with the Weather podcast on Spotify, you'll find a history of Ireland and history of AA in Ireland, and it is really interesting. And I thought, just for what it's worth, is that one of the stories the guy says that when he came over he was from Ireland, he went to Philadelphia and got sober in Philadelphia, and then came back to Ireland on his holidays with his wife. And she said, go and set up some AA meetings, because there was no AA. And he went around the south of Ireland, and he went to a couple of the churches. And again, this is with the greatest respect to the church at that time, and said, I want to set up some AA meetings. Could you help? And they said, well, I can't help you because there's no alcoholics in Ireland. True story. So it's on. If you want to listen to it, it's a fantastic listen on the Here's Tom with the Weather podcast. It's a fantastic bit of audio. So again, that was thanks to my friend Eugene, actually, who's I think he's just left the meeting. He's got to put his daughter to bed. But thanks again. So Joe, final question, mate. You've won the lottery, whatever it is in Canada. You've won $1 billion, and you've got this super yacht. And you go around the world, you've got all your worldly possessions on this super yacht, you're living it up as the richest atheist in the world, you're having a great time, sunning yourself in the tropics, you're somewhere off Fiji, and the boat strikes a coral reef, and it rapidly starts to sink, and all you've got time for is a plastic bag, and you can get to your bookshelf, and you've only got time to get one book. You grab the book, put it in the plastic bag, and swim to the desert island. What's the book, who wrote it, and why?
I'm prepared for this question because I'm not only a guest on your show, I'm also a faithful listener.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what I'm going to say is the book I'm going to bring is my Kindle notebook, which has all of my Ernie Kurtz and Catherine Ketchum books, and but there's not going to be any power when I get there. So that's not going to last. If I had a sheet of loose leaf and a pen, that would do more for my sanity than reading the same book over and over again. Just I'd write Jeb's book for him. No one would ever see it, but I'd do it.
That's it. We're going to hold you to that. Listen, so will you come back and see us when you've written that book then, yeah? Or maybe before. When you're halfway through, give us a sneak peek, all right?
Yeah.
That's great. So listen, thank you very much. We're going to be back here again next Friday with Trishna, who's going to be looking at the 12 steps from the point of view of the Divine Mother, which should be fascinating. And she's a real interesting character. I tell you what, Trishna is certainly out there, but she's a wonderful, wonderful person. So we'll be back here again next Friday. Again, this podcast will be available on Spotify and iTunes pretty well soon if Lebowski gets his finger out and gets on with it, and also on YouTube. We'll be here. So if you want to listen to it all again, we're going to be there. But listen, we're going to hang around after the end of this, and you can have a chit chat if you want. But until then, I'm going to turn off the podcast. See you next week. Thank you very much.
Happy New Year, everyone.